And we have a panel of diaper bank leaders with us today. I'm just trying, sorry for the delay, I'm just trying to advance the slides. Okay, there we go. So we have three panelists today. We have Bernie Schroer from HappyBottoms and Liz Sutherlin from HappyBottoms and Jorge Medina from the Texas Diaper Bank. And they're going to be sharing their experience and expertise in staff development with us. And we should have time at the end for questions. If you have a question, you can post it in the chat box. Or if you have an audio or phone connection, you can press the hand icon to raise your hand. And if neither of those options work, you can also send an email to us at Susan@Diaper Bank Network or Flannery@Diaper Bank Network. And I just want to clarify that Joanne is not the host, it's Susan, but we sign in under Joanne's account, so that's me. And with that, I think that we are ready to get started, so we'll start with Bernie.
All right, well, thanks, everyone. I'm with HappyBottoms and working under Liz's direction, and my expertise is in human resources. So I do a lot of the HR activities with HappyBottoms, and of course, one of those very important ones is the recruitment process. So with that, I'm going to start off by just generally talking about the recruitment process. And then Liz is going to, and Jorge are going to go more into application as their specific locations and how they've implemented this. But, we're going to be talking about the recruitment process overall, which is everyone's, I'm sure, aware, is your goal in recruitment is really to get and hire the most qualified talent you can that's going to contribute to your organization's success. And the major steps in that process are, number one, sourcing, and then selecting, and then another very important one that a lot of organizations forget to focus on is the actual onboarding. So with that, some of the worst habits in the recruitment process and things to avoid is just, number one, making sure that you're not setting the wrong tone. So as with any successful sale or transaction, communication is important. And whether it's through email or face-to-face or over the phone, always sound enthusiastic when you're talking to prospective candidates, making sure that you're articulating the fact that you care. Second mistake when you're recruiting people is not listening enough. And I know I'm guilty of this a lot of times where when I'm interviewing someone and I ask a question, it's very awkward and it's uncomfortable to have silence. So I tend to fill in that silence, or I tend to kind of help the candidate along because I just my nature is I want to reach out and help someone that's struggling. And that's just a really hard thing to overcome. But when you're recruiting, they always say that it's 2 parts listening and 1 part talking. And, when you're interviewing people, you've really got to try to not fill in those empty spaces or, try to help the candidate along. Just really, ask the questions and listen for the answers. Another mistake is just really not understanding who and what you're looking for. So really making sure that you're understanding what that position is going to be doing, making sure everyone is on board with that, and you've identified in advance the qualifications that you need to look for when filling that position. I know, it happens quite a bit. It's happened to me a lot where, and sometimes even as you're going through and you're looking at qualifications, sometimes your criteria does change, but it's always good to check back and just make sure, okay, this is where we set out. This is the role we set out to fill. Are we still there? And make sure that you do have a written job description of this is the job that the responsibilities that you're seeking the person, and that's often overlooked. And when you are recruiting, making sure, you're focusing on where your time is most valuable. Sometimes it's easy to get sidetracked and do more of the admin and the transactional work, but really constantly think about when you're recruiting, where's your effort going to be placed that's going to have a better outcome. And the other thing that I've often seen is not being completely open and honest with the pros and the cons of the position. So, make sure, sometimes you have the tendency to kind of not focus on what's not working well or not what potential barriers may be or difficulties that people may be presented in the role. Make sure that in addition to what's positive about the position, you do set the expectation of, some of the negatives, which might be, not having funding for all the staff that you want to have, or maybe because you're not fully staffed, the person's going to have to do a lot of admin and transactional work. Just don't ignore and don't sugarcoat kind of the negatives of the role. All right. So starting with sourcing, the goal here is you really want to try to attract sufficient candidates. You want to have a good, robust, diverse applicant pool of people that have the required skills, qualities, and experience that you're trying to fill. And it's always a struggle here because you're trying to balance getting quality, cost, and time to hire. I know in my experience, the jobs where I'm always getting pressured by the manager to find someone quickly, sometimes it's just a high probability in a lot of cases that those don't work out because we really haven't spent enough time trying to attract and identify potential candidates. So personally, from my experience, I hate being in a rush. But a lot of times I'm in that situation because someone's unexpectedly left and, the manager and other people are trying to fill in that gap of work. So it's always trying to balance those three items that are often difficult. Common approaches to sourcing, posting for the job, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn is a very highly used source now, community job boards, campus recruiting in some situations, internal folks, making sure that you're considering internal people for upward mobility. And then there's also the opportunity to use staffing firms as a tool to source candidates. The problem with many of those sources is you're really just, you're relying on passive candidates. So when you post a job, you're actually typically appealing to people that are looking. And you always need to kind of, and this is another pearl that I often have to remind myself, is to really dig into why someone's looking and really understand their motivation for looking. But most of our candidates in those, using those sources are the passive candidate. And what you're wanting to do is to try to find those people that really aren't looking, that they're in their position, they're doing well and they're successful. Those are the people that you also want to try to source. And you can do that by, obviously, referrals, calling around, talent communities, blogs. And the other really important one that I think Liz does a very good job of is just networking. Just as you're out there talking with people, just letting them know, I'm looking for someone, who do you know? So networking is a big, in fact, there's some surveys or a lot of recruiting firms talk about the 20-20-60 rule. So for sourcing, 20% of your candidates might come from job posting, another 20% from targeted emails, but 60% of your successful candidates come from networking. Another forum that's really gaining a lot of upkeep or uptake right now is Pinterest. And Pinterest right now has over 12 million users, and they're retaining and engaging users 2 to 3 times more efficiently than Twitter. And that site is responsible for sending more traffic to websites and blogs than Twitter, Google, and LinkedIn combined. So Pinterest is one of those social medias that just has a huge opportunity for audience. And one of the ideas, and actually want to try it with HappyBottoms, we haven't done it yet, but it's one thing I want to do, is you create a board. And you create a board and more, instead of it's a job posting, it's obviously you're communicating that you're looking for a position, but it's more doing it in a story format. It's telling a story about HappyBottoms and what this role will contribute to the community and so on. Let's see. And then once you've got your candidate pool, the next important component to the recruiting process is selecting. Obviously, you've got people, you potentially have a resume or some kind of summary of the person's historical experiences and potentially their value proposition. But it's really your goal to truly understand and validate that person's knowledge, skills, and abilities, and kind of what motivates them before hiring. And to do that, common approaches are to obviously interview. You should consider getting them exposure to the organization. Some organizations use selection tests like personality profiles or even like an IQ test. But I think a really effective approach are real-life tasks or projects where you're putting that person and presenting them, what would you do, presenting them with a situation that they are more likely to encounter in the role and finding out how they would approach it. And I know, my experience with Liz, and she'll remember this, when we were interviewing with our prior organization for salespeople, a really common example of this was managers interviewing salespeople and saying, I want you to try to sell me this pen. So just again, providing them with real life tasks or projects and seeing how they perform is a really good indication of, do they have the knowledge, do they have the skills, and do they have the abilities to be successful? Because that's typically where a lot of times it fails, where a manager thinks they've got the knowledge and the skills, and they really didn't do a good job of proving it. And when the person comes on board, lo and behold, they don't have it. And, my managers will often say, well, they misrepresented their skills. And I really put the blame on the manager to say, but that was your job to decipher that and to figure out that what they were saying, there was no substance to it. And the other element that people shouldn't forget is onboarding. So once you've gone through all this effort of sourcing and selecting, you want to make sure that you really have you're establishing a strong foundation up front between that new employee and the organization. You want to present a picture to them that they're important, you're excited to have them. What frustrates me, I see all the time, is we always celebrate people that are leaving. So people are leaving to go to another opportunity, and we have this celebration. And I often think, why don't we do this when people are coming to us versus when they're leaving? Research says that most people will decide to stay with an organization within their first 6 months. So if you hire someone, give them a desk and a chair and you leave them, that's not going to be a very positive onboarding program. As opposed to you've established a plan. You take them out to lunch. You've got plans for them every day for the first week or two on their lunches. You're setting up meetings for introductions. You've outlined, in essence, their first 30 days at least on what they're going to be doing, what they're going to be focused on, establishing a partner for success and really working with them as closely as possible. And that is all I had.
Okay, if you could just forward it to the next slide, and then I'll pass it on to Liz.
All right.
Hold on 1 minute, Liz.
Okay, well, hello everyone. I want to thank Susan and Allison and Joanne for asking us to do this again, because one of the things when you go over staffing, it reminds you of how important it is, and we're always in the middle of something with our staff, and just going through all of the things Bernie presented is helpful to remind me of all the things we should be doing for our employees and as we work to hire new ones. So I think many of you may know HappyBottoms was actually started in 2010 by our founder. Our founder was a young woman who started this completely volunteer and all by herself. And in my presentation, I'm going to show you the growth in numbers of individuals who are on our staff, whether they were paid or unpaid, and what positions we put them in, and also when we added paid positions, how we funded them. And I'm not going to claim this will work in every community or at every diaper bank, but we've been fortunate enough that it has worked well here. And hearing Bernie's statistic about, people decide whether they're staying at 6 months, all of our people have been with us more than 6 months. So I'm extremely thrilled about that, because that must mean they're probably staying. So way back in 2010, our founder, Jill, started this all by herself. And because of a personal move, she was going to have to turn over HappyBottoms. And she found me, and I drug in my sister-in-law, Pam, who many of you have met. And our backgrounds were that I was in kind of sales, marketing, and healthcare, had done a little manufacturing in my career. And Pam's strengths were in banking and audit. And we had another friend who joined us in January of 2011 when we took over. And so we had 3 full-time volunteers in the year of 2011 working at HappyBottoms. And we had very different skill sets, which we believe was very helpful to getting HappyBottoms off the ground. And in that first year, our distribution of diapers did not include repackaging. We had no warehouse space of our own until the end of that year, so we were not managing a warehouse. We had very few additional volunteers because the 3 of us could kind of get everything done. And we began to divvy up the roles based on our skill set. And so I took on the executive director role. My sister-in-law, Pam, took on finance, and our friend Linda took on operations. And then in 2012, we did have a warehouse where we had warehouse space, and Linda let us know that she unfortunately couldn't continue the full-time volunteer role. She had so many commitments in her life, it just wasn't going to be possible. But by 2012, we had some space which we needed to manage, and we had the beginning of volunteers helping us in the organization with our distribution. So Pam and I divvied up the roles into me continuing as executive director and Pam kind of being the finance operations person. We are a model in which we only work with partner agencies, and so a lot of the work with the agencies to collect all the data that we do on our kids falls under the operations part. And so Pam was working kind of in the program management function as well, and I was busy selling, trying to get us funding, trying to get us all the things that we needed to move our organization forward. But by the end of 2012, we had decided we were going to repackage all the diapers, so we needed more volunteers. We also were managing pretty much 2 warehouse spaces at the time, and we looked at it and said, you know what, by the end of this year, we're going to be completely out of capacity. We were killing ourselves, and we needed a program manager really badly. So at the end of 2012, we did our first event, and the event revenue from the 2012 event allowed us to hire a program manager in 2013. So that was our first full-time position, was our program manager, and she also did the volunteer management and actually recruiting volunteers, and so we were able to take those responsibilities out of our responsibility list and add them into another full-time paid staff. And that really worked quite well throughout 2013. In 2013, we had actually relocated and consolidated into 1 warehouse space, and if any of you were here at the conference last year, you got to see that space. And so we had a place in which to operate. We had well-outlined job descriptions for each of us, or I should say at least for our program manager slash volunteer manager, because we were paying them, so we had a great job description for them. And 2013 was another year of growth for us, and we decided we were going to need to hire some more people. So we held another event. We were fortunate enough to double the proceeds from that event, and we had also found an opportunity to write for a grant that would help fund our program manager. So as 2014 started, we had our program manager and a volunteer manager came in. And for the first 6 months of 2014, we had a part-time volunteer manager, and he was also kind of managing the warehouse. So when we started the year, we were paying that program manager through the grant that we had written for and received. We were paying the volunteer warehouse manager's part-time position through event revenue and donations. And as we got a little further into the year, we decided we needed an administrative assistant. And that's where, when Bernie was talking about the roles and responsibilities piece in hiring and outlining what tasks are really involved in the job, we kind of found that Pam and I were wasting our time doing administrative work when she could have been writing more grants and I could have been out in the community drumming up more funding if we weren't doing as much paperwork. So we hired an administrative assistant in the beginning of 2014, and that person was part-time to start with. So we moved into 2014 with that part-time program manager, part-time administrative assistant, and our volunteer warehouse manager started the year as part-time. Well, by mid-year of 2014, we realized that we needed even more support. We were growing like crazy, and we had put out a little over 600,000 diapers in 2013, and we were projecting to be at 1 million or more in 2014, and we just needed more staff. So fortunately, you know, our donations were good. We had the program manager covered with that grant, and our event revenues were sufficient that we could go to a full-time volunteer and warehouse manager, and we could also increase the hours of our administrative assistant. So when you saw us last year, we had the full-time volunteer warehouse manager, the administrative assistant at about 20 hours a week, and our program manager at about 40 hours a week. As we got to the end of last summer, we had considered hiring an executive director. However, we didn't find a person who was ready for that job, and we also realized HappyBottoms wasn't quite ready from a staffing perspective to just turn it over to an outside executive director. We really needed to do a little more internal work. So what we landed on with our board was that we needed a development director. We needed someone fueling that engine of funding who would be able to, move us forward from a funding perspective. And so the money that we thought we were going to spend on an executive director in 2014 ended up going towards a development director. So we had the full-time development director, the full-time volunteer warehouse manager, the part-time administrative assistant, and the program manager. And as you see, most of those paid positions were staffed from either event revenue or individual donations. And by individual donations, I mean, anybody who would give us money that we didn't need to spend on diapers, we would spend towards salaries and operating costs. We also still had Cam and me full-time unpaid. And in our same roles, but every time we added a person to the organization, we could take our job description and take some of those duties and offload them to the paid employees. As we entered 2015, we decided our business manager needed to become full-time because we wanted to take the finance piece off of Cam's shoulders, and we were adding donor software. And we knew that our business manager was going to be working on recording all of our donor information in the donor software, and because we chose an integrated accounting and donor software program, we decided that business manager should have the finance piece as well. So fortunately, we had hired a very astute young lady when we hired the part-time business manager, and she could go full-time, and she's getting her master's in nonprofit management. So it ended up being a real win-win for us. She was looking for a full-time job. We were looking for a full-time person, and today we sit with that part-time program manager, still funded by a grant, the business manager and development director, pretty much funded from our event revenue, our volunteer and warehouse manager, because they are all programmed. We can use some grant money for that and donations, and then Pam and I are still here as full-time unpaid. I should mention that as we went from 2014 to 2015, we still wanted to, hire a paid executive director, and we were trying to accumulate monies to do that. And our event revenue, I had told you, from 13 to 14 it doubled, and from 14 to 15 we added another $20,000 in event revenue, which really helped us on our major events to be able to allocate more money to supporting those staff positions that you really can't support any other way. So moving right along, this is what our org chart looks like today. So our current staffing in the first half of 2015, I'm still the unpaid executive director. Everybody in purple, I've just discussed their jobs, and purple is paid. And then Pam is still working more than just part-time as a grant writer who's also still helping our business manager transition some of the finance responsibilities. So that's what our organization looks like today, and that's how we paid for it. And then I thought I would share with you our plan for the second half of 2015. So we do plan to hire a paid executive director in July, and we have just redone that job description so that that job is standalone without a lot of the additional duties that we've been able to give to other members of our staff. So we have a lot of the development work done by our development director. We have a lot of the warehouse pieces done by our warehouse manager. We've kind of gotten the executive director job to where it should be a manageable full-time position. We have, from the monies we accrued from our donations and events from 2014, set aside about 50% of that person's compensation for this year. So we start the year with money in the bank to be able to do this, which allows us to really begin full-time recruiting. And we've just started circulating that job description, and we hope to have a pool of candidates by the end of April. To fund that salary, not just this year, but in the coming years, Gina, our development director, has put together a 3-year funding campaign, and it's very similar to a capacity building campaign, if any of you guys are familiar with that. It's basically, we looked at how much money do we need to bring into the organization to be able to fund the salary for 100% of the first year, 75% of the second year, and 50% of the third year. And then we're going out to funders and individuals, and by funders I mean different grant makers. We have a number of foundations here in Kansas City who we can approach with a capacity building campaign versus just pay for a salary. So the reason for the way it's structured is that it's demonstrating that over time, as we reduce our dependence on this funding from the campaign, we'll be increasing our donations from individuals and other sources to supplement the future years of this person's salary. So Gina's pulled together a development plan, and we're working on that, and we're really pretty confident that this is going to be able to be achieved. And as we hire that executive director, of course, they're going to become heavily involved in making sure that that is successful. And so my last slide is just to show you, here's what our org chart will look like. We'll still have 6 people in our organization. Everybody in purple is paid, and Pam will shift to reporting to the development director as she really, hopefully we can get to where she's just doing grant writing and not having to do it full-time, but can accomplish that part-time. So that's how we've gotten to where we are now, plus a little bit of a future look into where we hope to be by August, September of this year. So that's all I have. Susan, if you want to hand off to Jorge.
Okay, if you could just advance the slide one more, and I will. Thanks very much,
Sure.
Liz.
Let me find it.
There we go. Okay, next we're going to hear from Jorge at the Texas Diaper Bank.
Good afternoon, everyone. And what I'm going to talk about is about creating a staffing model. And I think that a staffing model is really important no matter what stage of growth and development you are in your organization, even if you're just starting small or you already have several staff people, it's sometimes something that you need to step back and look at and see whether or not, as you're adding on positions, those positions are the positions that you should be adding. And sometimes what I have found in talking to other nonprofits is that sometimes organizations have the tendency to go and look at what other nonprofits are doing. So they go and they look at their organizational chart and they say, well, these are the positions that those organizations have, and I think that those are the positions that we should have. And sometimes they also, I hear that individuals will go and look at job descriptions and say, okay, well, I'm just going to use that job description for an executive director or for a grant writer or development person, et cetera. And although it's good to sometimes look at another organization's job description, maybe to provide you with a little bit of insight or as a guidance, you should really be creating positions for the functions and the activities that you need that will help move your organization forward in growth and in development. So one of the things that I like to do is to create a staffing model. And in order to start a staffing model, you basically start with a step 1, which is basically looking at all the different types of functions that you need. And these are not just the functions that you need for your immediate needs, but it's also looking at all the functions that you need and then trying to figure out who is going to take on those responsibilities. And so, and this is without considering the titles of the positions and so on and so forth. So for example, you would say, you know, what kind of functions do we need? We need someone to do bookkeeping. We need someone to do fundraising. We need someone to do grant writing, human resources, marketing, office operations, volunteer management, warehouse operations, and any other type of functions that you can consider that you would need to operate your organization. In step 2, then you start getting a little bit more detail. What are the type of activities within that function that that person would be doing, or often referred as what are the tasks involved within that function? So for example, you look at bookkeeping. Well, the bookkeeping function would require to manage all the accounting files, manage petty cash, record invoices, issue checks, reconcile bank accounts monthly, record bank deposits and other credits, record bank transfers and other debits, and record general ledger entries. So you really want to think about the specific activities that are involved in that function. And I think that Bernie mentioned something that was very important, is that the more clear you are in regards to the activities that that person will do, then they don't feel that they were misled when all of a sudden you start assigning other activities or other functions once they are hired. The more clear you are and the more detail you are in your job description, I think that you will have a happier employee in the long term. Moving on to step 3, once you have listed your functions and then the activities within those functions, then you want to start developing the titles or the staff position names. And so you can use the typical executive director, fundraiser, grant writer, office manager, and so on and so forth. And then in step 4, then we use, and I'll go on to the next slide, basically, you're creating your staffing model. You're basically now assigning all those functions to the different positions. And especially when you're starting out, for some positions, as Pam was talking about, Liz was talking about, you have different functions that you have to carry out that are not necessarily typical of that position, but it's necessary because someone needs to do it. But this will also help you as you've identified different functions. As you add on staff, then you can take that whole function and then reassign it to a new staff member or a new position that you've created. One of the things that I want to talk about was the approach that Pam used, and I think that it's very important to try to make sure that you have enough funding for those positions that you create. You never want to create a position in which you're going to have to let go of someone because you ran out of funding. That is, I don't think that's healthy for the organization, and people won't be so ready to join your organization if you are known to do something like that. Also, using grants is something that is very important for the growth of organization. And one of the things that you need to consider when you're adding positions to your grants is how do you position that in your grants so that you can get a staff position funded without you going out and asking for a staff position directly. I think that that is something that is very important. And one way that you can accomplish that is, as Liz was talking about, is when you create a program and then you add that position as part of that program. And then when you're talking about it in your grant, make sure that you're stressing how that position is going to enhance that program or that project, and emphasize those functions, emphasize those activities, and so that the funder can then more clearly see that without this position, then the program or the project would not you would not be able to implement it. Okay, so that's my presentation, and I guess we would like to go ahead and just take questions now from anyone. Hello? Hello?
Jorge, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Was everyone able to hear my presentation?
I hope so.
I hope so too.
I mean, I could.
Okay. I noticed that we started losing people, and I was like, oh, maybe they thought that I wasn't speaking. Oh, gosh. Can you hear Susan? Susan, are you there? Hello? Oh.
Hello?
Hello, Susan?
Yeah. Are you there? I seem to have lost the audio connection for a minute.
Okay.
But it looks like I'm the only one.
Okay. Were you able to hear my presentation?
Yeah. You were actually, it only happened in the last, 30 seconds.
Oh, okay.
Did you keep talking?
Yeah, I didn't realize it.
Okay. I mean, I see that you
fine.
advanced to the next slide. That's why I wasn't sure. I couldn't hear you, and so I wasn't sure if you were done or if you had more to say.
Okay. Well, we're just open for questions now.
Okay. If you have a question, you can raise your hand, or you can use the chat box. I'm going to unmute everybody. Okay. If you have a question, you can just speak up, or if you don't have an audio connection, you can also email us at Susan or Flannery at diaperbanknetwork.org.
I think Sue has her hand up.
Hi, this is Sue Spees. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sue.
Hi. We are just starting to look at adding staff, and and last night we had a board meeting, and the big discussion in regards to how we were going to staff these people was what could we do in order to raise money. So, of course, when you talked about having an event, I'm just wondering what kind of event are you having that's working for you?
So, Sue, this is Liz. Our event is just a silent and live auction with a fund and need, and we call it a happy hour event. And we also had a graphic designer who encouraged us to do this, and she said, okay, it's going to be in November. It's going to be all about Thanksgiving, and we're going to call this our attitude of gratitude. So we are working on our fourth one, and it basically started with us soliciting the community for donations for the auction, and then inviting everybody we knew, who wanted to come. We didn't charge enough the first couple of years on our ticket price, but we're slowly working that ticket price up, and we've had a pretty successful event. This year we have a whole planning team for it, and I think it's going to be more run by our volunteers than our staff, which is great because as it gets bigger, it takes more work. But that's what the event was, and I don't know if that's the right event for everybody. I think you have to find something that works in your community, and we kind of knew auction events worked pretty well in the Kansas City area, so that's what we started with.
Do you have a meal or food available at that event, or how does that work?
So it's a happy hour, so we have beverages and heavy hors d'oeuvres, and by heavy hors d'oeuvres, I mean you can make a meal out of it. We've had the luxury of having restaurants and other grocery stores who kind of have catering services donate a lot of food, so we get our wine and beer donated, we get water donated, and we get the food donated. So that's why people are telling us we don't charge enough for our ticket price. Our first year we only charged $10. So we've moved it up to where we'll be charging this year $50 in advance and $60 at the door. But
and how long does the event last?
Yeah, it's 5:30 to 8:30. And by not making it a meal, you don't have to have sit-down space for everybody.
Oh, okay.
Space for us is one of the most expensive parts of the event.
Okay, thank you very much. This was, it's a very interesting concept. It's something that we could possibly use.
Great.
Does anyone else have any questions for us?
Jorge, this is Debbie from the Diaper Alliance. I wanted to say your presentation was awesome, as were the others. I cannot think of any direct questions right now, but I'm sure I will after we hang up.
We're always happy to help, Debbie, so just reach out to us by email, and we're always happy to help.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we did record the presentation, so we'll make it available on the website, and we can make the PowerPoint slides available to the Google group, and that's also, besides being able to email Liz or Bernie or Jorge directly, you can also put out a question or an idea or a thought on the Google group if something comes to mind after this presentation.
This is Sue Spees again. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sue.
Hi. On the Google group, it might be a nice idea if we could get some ideas from other organizations that are just starting to consider adding staff as to how they funded those positions in the beginning. Because I'm sure that there's a lot of us in the same boat trying to figure out how we can go from volunteer to paid staff.
I will be happy. What I'll do is tomorrow I'll post the webinar slides, and I can put that question out because I think you're right. I think that there are many of our members that probably are at the phase that, like Bernie had mentioned in the beginning, networking, and of course that has to happen before you're ready to hire someone. And so there are things that some of the diaper banks can be doing even before they're ready to hire. So I think that's a great idea because then they can be learning from the people who are starting to generate their ideas about finding the funding.
Yeah. But before you start, Sue, I mean, I just want to encourage you that before you start seeking the funding is that funders want to know if you have a plan. So if you have a staffing model of the positions that you are going to looking to add first, or for example, if you have your dream organizational chart, it's something that you can provide funders with and then say, okay, this would be the dream organizational chart of all the staff that we would need if the organization was operating at its highest level. However, to begin with, this is our approach, and then you present them with a secondary organizational chart with those tasks and functions and how those people are going to carry those tasks and functions you know, as you hire. And I think that that's something, you know, you have to have a plan. And sometimes, you know, I think that really helps strengthen your case, especially if you're going to funders, that you know what are the different steps you're going to take as you're growing. Yeah. Just a suggestion.
I know just from my experience, you know, people understand why you need diapers and why the diapers need to be purchased and the money that you need to fundraise for that, but they just don't see beyond that to see what is happening in the background. So when you put a plan out like that, they can actually see a description of who's working and what kind of work we're all doing in order for these things to happen. So I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, exactly. Because there are certain functions that definitely volunteers cannot, you know, unless you have someone like Liz that's a full-time volunteer that can really do certain functions like that. So I think that having that plan is important. And yeah, like you said, it gives them a clear picture. It's like, oh, okay, now I can see why you need that person.
Right, and why you might need some money.
Yes, exactly, and why you need some money for that. Exactly. Yeah, but what I say, just one thing that I was going to mention to you is like if you make your case with like this year I'd like to distribute 1 million diapers to 20 or 50 agencies within our area. However, in order to do that, I will need a program manager to be able to coordinate the distribution, of these diapers and the solicitation of additional diapers and funding. So then you've created, you know what I'm saying? You're not putting it first like I need a program manager.
Right.
You got to set your case in that way.
Okay, thank you. That's very
You're
helpful.
Welcome.
I also wanted to add, I was thinking about the need to sort of explain all of the overhead and the administrative, all of the work that goes into running the diaper bank besides the diapers in terms of justifying the positions, and it reminded me also of the Pinterest strategy of sharing the stories about the diaper bank and having that built up and have it be already there. And so we at NDBN have just recently set up our Pinterest account, and so everyone who uses it or wants to try it should check it out and sort of share those links, and you can kind of experiment with sharing with us on Pinterest as well, but that's a great way to build a story. And then also the Google groups, of course, if you're working on your dream chart or a strategy, absolutely share it with the Google group before you share it with funders so that you can get feedback.
That's a great idea. And I'm interested in looking at Pinterest because I have never used it, so.
Oh, it's a whole other world.
I know. We just
Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, well, I think at that point we are ready to close. I want to say thank you again to Bernie and Liz and Jorge for sharing your incredible experience. It's fantastic to have you guys as a resource and other people in the network, and we're all fortunate to be able to share that and take advantage of it. And thanks everybody for joining in on the webinar. And like I said, I'm going to send that information out over the Google group tomorrow, and but feel free to go ahead and go on the board and comment or ask any questions. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you.
Bye-bye.